In a world that never seems to stop talking, silence has become a stranger. In a society that constantly measures value by connection, companionship, and the presence of others, being alone is often mistaken for being lost. But solitude and loneliness are not the same. They are not even similar. One drains, the other restores. One is the cry of emptiness. The other is the fullness of presence. Solitude is not an absence, it is a presence, not of people, but of awareness. To be in solitude is to be uninterrupted, to be unwatched, to be undistracted. In that quiet place, a different kind of energy awakens, not chaotic, not loud but clear, focused, peaceful. In solitude, one begins to see, not with the eyes, but with the mind. Loneliness is born from longing. It is when the heart reaches out into the world and finds nothing to hold. But solitude is different. It is not reaching out. It is turning inward. It is not seeking something to fill the void. It is discovering there was no void to begin with, only space. And space is not emptiness. Space is potential. When a person truly enters solitude, it is as if they walk into a temple, not built of stone or wood, but of silence and presence. There is no noise inside this temple, no judgment, no comparison, no mirror, that stillness. And within that stillness, one begins to see the movements of the self. In daily life, we are constantly pulled by conversation, by media, by the opinions of others. The mind becomes scattered. Identity becomes fragmented. We begin to play roles we didn't choose, repeat stories we didn't write. But solitude interrupts that pattern. It offers a pause, a sacred pause, where the soul is no longer demanded to perform. Without the noise of the world, we begin to hear the quieter truths. What do I believe? What do I want? What am I doing simply because everyone else is doing it? These questions only arise when silence is allowed to enter. Solitude is not the time between connections. It is the space where connection with the self is restored. It is also not always comfortable. In the beginning, solitude can feel like detoxification. The silence is loud. The mind rushes in to fill the gap, all the old thoughts. Unresolved feelings and hidden fears rise to the surface. But this is not a sign of something going wrong. This is the process. The temple of solitude does not hide your truths. It reveals them. To sit in solitude is to sit with the raw material of your own mind, not curated, not filtered, just as it is. You begin to notice your attachments, your desires, your tendencies. And over time, if one remains in that sacred space, something changes. The patterns soften, the storms pass, and in their place, clarity appears. Solitude is sacred not because it is rare, but because it is pure. It is not shaped by social roles, expectations, or performance. It is the only space in which you are not being watched. And in that space, something ancient and natural can grow. The self, not the ego, not the identity crafted for others, but the true self begins to rise. In solitude, you do not need to speak. You do not need to explain. You are not reacting. You are simply being. And being, without demand or expectation, is a radical act in today's world. It is meditation in motion. It is a form of freedom. Many fear solitude because they associate it with absence. The absence of love, the absence of support, the absence of validation. But solitude is not about what is missing. It is about what is present when everything else is removed. There is a profound discipline in choosing solitude. It is easy to fill time with noise, easy to surround oneself with distraction. But to be alone, truly alone, without reaching for the phone, the television, the endless scroll, this is a kind of training, a refinement, a stripping away of the unnecessary, a return to the essential. In solitude, the senses become sharper, a simple sound becomes rich, a breath becomes deep, a thought becomes a path to explore. There is no rush, no one is waiting. And so, finally, you can listen, not to others, but to the part of you that has always been quiet, the part of you that knows without words. Solitude also teaches responsibility. There is no one to blame, no one to depend on, no one to distract you from yourself. If you are unhappy, it becomes clear. If you are at peace, it is obvious. You begin to see what brings you joy, what drains your energy, what is essential, and what is not. This sacred space becomes a mirror, not a mirror of appearance, but of truth. You begin to see the patterns you've repeated, the stories you've believed, the parts of yourself you've silenced. And within that seeing, healing begins. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, slowly. Like water smoothing stone, when one becomes comfortable in solitude, they become whole. Not because they reject others, but because they no longer need others to complete them. Connection becomes a choice, not a requirement. Love becomes something to give, not something to chase. The self becomes centered, not scattered. In this way, solitude is not a punishment. It is not a gap to be filled. It is a ground to be walked, a practice, a path, a discipline, a gift. There is a subtle truth many overlook. The path to strength is not paved by resistance to others, but by refinement of the self. While most search outside for comfort, guidance, and certainty, those who begin to turn inward find something far more enduring, the beginning of self-mastery. And in this process, the chains of dependency begin to fall away, not all at once, but slowly, like mist lifting from a still morning lake. Dependency is often invisible to the one who carries it. It hides itself beneath routines, under relationships, inside comforts disguised as normalcy. But beneath the surface, the dependency whispers that without something or someone, we are incomplete. It quietly shapes our choices, our emotions, our sense of stability. It can make us fragile, not because we lack strength, but because we've never had to find it on our own. Self-mastery, however, does not emerge from comfort. It begins in confrontation, the confrontation of our own mind, our habits, our reactions. It begins when we recognize the patterns we have relied upon and question whether they truly serve us. This process is not easy, it is not glamorous, but it is liberating. Dependency asks, who will fix this for me? Self-mastery asks, what part of this can I understand more deeply? Dependency waits. Self-mastery acts, not with haste, not with ego, but with presence, discipline, and intention. To master the self is not to dominate or control the self. It is to become familiar with it intimately. It is to know the mind like one knows a difficult terrain, every slope, every soft spot, every shadow. It is to observe how thought arises, how desire forms, how fear persuades, and how emotion moves the body. And through observation, something extraordinary happens. Choice appears. Dependency is often born from fear. Fear of being alone, fear of failure, fear of responsibility. But self-mastery reveals that fear is not a command, it is merely a signal. It points to a boundary we have not yet crossed, an inner limit we've not yet challenged. And each time we choose to move toward that fear rather than away from it, we take a step away from dependency and towards sovereignty. When one begins to master the self, reliance on external validation diminishes. There is less need to be seen, to be affirmed, to be praised. Attention from others no longer defines worth. Instead, the individual begins to feel whole within. There is a quiet confidence that does not shout, does not seek the spotlight. It simply exists, steady, grounded, enough. This inner shift is not abrupt, it is cultivated. Like the training of the body, the training of the mind and heart requires consistency. You begin to sit with discomfort rather than escape it. You begin to notice when reaction wants to take over and instead respond with intention. You choose simplicity over excess, discipline over impulse, presence over distraction. And in time, something changes. The world no longer controls your inner state. Circumstances may rise and fall, but your center holds. You may walk through chaos, but you are not chaotic. You may be challenged, but you are not easily shaken. This is the fruit of self-mastery, not control over the world, but harmony within it. Dependency thrives on reaction. It waits for things to happen, for others to lead, for life to provide. But self-mastery invites responsibility. It does not mean isolation. It does not mean rejecting help. It means knowing that help is a gift, not a requirement. That companionship is sacred, but not a substitute for inner work. It means moving through life with a sense of internal authority, not superiority, but alignment. You are not seeking to be better than others. You are seeking to be better in your own eyes, to meet your own standard, to walk your own path with clarity. This clarity requires effort. The mind does not quiet itself. The emotions do not regulate themselves. The patterns do not break themselves. Each moment of awareness is a moment of training. Each time you observe without judgment, each time you pause before reacting, each time you act from principle rather than impulse. This is self-mastery in motion. There is a strength that comes from needing nothing. But that strength is not cold. It is not distant. It is warm. It is calm. It allows one to love freely, to give without needing return, to walk with others without leaning on them for balance. The journey to self-mastery reveals that many of the things we thought we needed were only temporary supports. Like training wheels, they serve their purpose. But eventually, they must be removed if we wish to ride with full freedom. The fear of falling will still be there. but the legs grow stronger with each push. The balance grows steadier with each attempt. Self-mastery is not about perfection. It is about practice. It is about choosing not to be at the mercy of moods, cravings, and habits. It is about learning the nature of the self, its rhythms, its triggers, its needs, and developing the discipline to lead it rather than follow it. The one who has replaced dependency with self-mastery does not isolate themselves. They simply stop waiting to be rescued. They stop outsourcing peace. They stop blaming circumstances. They begin to turn inward for strength, for clarity, for direction. And from this inner source, they move forward, not faster, not louder, but deeper. There is a misunderstanding that has lived in the collective human mind for generations. The idea that the feminine exists to be completed, to be filled, to be chosen, to be rescued, to be made whole by something outside of itself. This belief is not just a cultural story, it is a distortion that arises when strength is measured only by its loudness, when value is seen only through productivity, and when presence is only recognized in what is visible. But the feminine spirit does not need to be completed. It is not a half seeking its other part. It is not a question waiting for an answer. It is not an emptiness seeking to be filled. The feminine is and has always been whole. Not whole in the sense of perfection. Not whole in the sense of lacking nothing ever, but whole in its formless completeness. Just as the ocean is whole even when still, just as the moon is whole even when partially seen, just as a flame is whole even when it flickers. The feminine is often misunderstood because it does not perform in the same way as the masculine. It does not conquer. It does not rush. It does not force. It does not demand visibility. Instead, it holds. It contains, but it also destroys when something no longer serves its natural rhythm. It observes, it absorbs, it transforms, quietly, powerfully, with a presence that does not always need words. Wholeness is not always loud. In fact, it is often silent. It does not need to explain itself. The feminine knows this intuitively. Yet for centuries, it has been asked to justify its existence, to prove its value, to show that it belongs. It has been told, directly and indirectly, that it is missing something, that it needs a man, a child, a title, a form of external power to be recognized as meaningful. But the feminine spirit was never incomplete. It was simply placed in a world that didn't know how to see it. To live as a feminine being is to navigate a world that often mistakes softness for weakness, receptivity for passivity, emotional depth for instability. But what appears soft on the surface may be made of stone beneath. What looks still may carry vast movement below. The feminine is not just nurturing, it is knowing. Not just supportive, it is sustaining. Not just caring, it is clear. It holds multitudes, intuition, strength, vulnerability, wisdom, mystery. The cycles of the moon, the tides of the sea, the rhythms of nature, these are not metaphors. They are reminders. The feminine is not linear. It is cyclical. And to be cyclical is not to be broken. It is to be alive. In the quiet moments when she is alone, not abandoned, but chosen solitude, the feminine spirit meets itself. Without roles, without performance, without needing to be anything for anyone. In that sacred stillness, it is revealed again and again that nothing outside is required to make her more than she already is. Because within her is a source, not given, but born with. Not dependent, but deeply rooted. She may walk with others. She may love deeply. She may choose companionship, motherhood, leadership. But none of these things complete her. They are expressions, not definitions, of her wholeness. They are choices made from fullness, not from lack. To be whole is to be centered in one's own essence. To be aware of one's power without the need to prove it. To carry dignity that does not need an audience. To rest in the quiet knowledge that who you are, as you are, without adding, without subtracting, is already enough. There is a kind of power that does not roar. It does not break through walls. It does not take by force. It waits. It watches. It holds its ground like the earth itself. This is the feminine. Not absent of strength, but defined by a different strength. One that the world does not always recognize, but always needs. When the feminine forgets its wholeness, it begins to chase, to perform, to seek completion in things that cannot provide it. And the farther it moves from its own center, the more exhausted it becomes. This exhaustion is not a failure. It is a signal. A quiet invitation to return to the source within. Wholeness is not a concept. It is an experience. It is felt in the breath that does not rush, in the gaze that sees without judgment, in the body that no longer feels the need to shrink or harden or perform, in the soul that remembers it is not here to be half of anything, but to be fully what it already is. The feminine spirit is not dependent on the masculine to be valid. It may dance with it, complement it, move in harmony with it, but it does not derive its worth from that interaction. It is whole before it joins. It is whole if it never joins. The relationship between masculine and feminine is sacred only when both are complete on their own. What the world often calls weakness is only misunderstood depth. What the world labels as emotional is often truth in its rawest form. What is dismissed as irrational may simply be wisdom not yet measured by logic. The feminine does not ask to be understood in order to exist. It exists, and through its existence, it teaches. There is nothing missing in the one who walks alone, who creates alone, who sits with her thoughts and feels the entirety of her being without needing to dilute it. There is nothing less in the one who chooses her own company, her own silence, her own rhythm. There is nothing broken in the woman who is full without being filled, who is rooted without being tied, who is gentle without being weak, and who knows without needing to explain. In a world shaped by movement, measured by speed, and obsessed with action, stillness is often misunderstood. It is seen as inaction, as hesitation, as weakness. But this is a misjudgment, one rooted in noise, not in knowing. For those who have walked the inner path, who have sat in silence long enough to hear what lies beneath the surface of thought, it becomes clear stillness is not weakness. Stillness is strength in its most refined form. Stillness is not the absence of activity, it is the presence of awareness. It is not about doing nothing. It is about doing nothing unnecessarily. It is a deliberate withholding, a conscious pause, an act of discipline that says, not everything requires a reaction. Not everything needs to be answered. Not every stimulus deserves your energy. In the space between impulse and action, there lies a powerful moment, a breath, a pause. This is where stillness lives, in the margin between the external world and the internal response. Most people skip this space. They react before they reflect. They speak before they listen. They move before they understand. But stillness waits. Stillness watches. Stillness knows. The strength of stillness is not the kind that is celebrated publicly. It does not announce itself. It does not seek attention. It does not conquer lands or raise voices. Instead, it anchors. It roots. It holds like the base of a mountain or the depth of the ocean. Stillness is what gives everything else the ability to rise without falling apart. In stillness, the mind begins to reveal itself. When the body stops moving, when distractions are removed, when attention is turned inward, one sees the patterns that usually remain hidden, the restlessness, the looping thoughts, the expectations, the fears. And in this observation, an inner work begins. Not a striving, but a seeing. Not a pushing, but a witnessing. This is the ground of self-mastery. It is easy to distract yourself with movement. It is easy to stay busy and call it purpose. But the deeper path, the quieter path, is the one that asks you to sit with your breath, with your thoughts, with your emotions, with your truth. And in that stillness, you begin to distinguish between what is real and what is merely noise. True stillness is not frozen. It is not rigid. It is not lifeless. It is alive but not chaotic. It is attentive, but not reactive. Like a candle that does not flicker in a windless room, it shines with quiet presence. It does not ask for recognition. It simply illuminates what is. The warrior who moves without first being still moves blindly. The speaker who speaks without first being still speaks aimlessly. The mind that thinks without stillness will only chase itself in circles. Stillness is not the enemy of progress. It is the foundation of intelligent movement. It is what makes progress meaningful rather than mindless. To cultivate stillness requires strength, not physical strength, but internal stability. The strength to sit with discomfort. The strength to delay reaction. The strength to say no when the world demands a yes. The strength to choose silence over noise, reflection over impulse, presence over distraction. Stillness is a mirror. It reflects the true state of the mind. If there is chaos within, the attempt to be still will feel unbearable. Not because stillness is unpleasant, but because it makes the internal noise visible. And yet this is where the training begins. By remaining still through the discomfort, by watching rather than running, by holding the seat rather than abandoning it, one begins to refine the mind. This practice is not dramatic. It is not visible from the outside, but its effects are profound. A person who carries stillness within them moves differently through the world. Their steps are grounded. Their words are measured. Their energy is calm. They do not seek to dominate situations. They harmonize with them. They do not rush into decisions. They wait for clarity to arrive. Stillness is not passive. It is receptive. It receives the moment without rushing to change it. It listens more than it speaks. It responds only when necessary. And when it does move, that movement is precise, intentional, effective. One action from a still mind can be more powerful than 100 actions from a restless one. There are moments in life when the strongest thing you can do is to be still. When emotions rise like waves, when uncertainty clouds the mind, when everything around you pulls you toward reaction, it is in those moments that stillness becomes a form of strength that nothing external can provide. It is not avoidance. It is control. It is not indifference. It is wisdom. It is not weakness. It is depth. Stillness also teaches patience. In the absence of urgency, the body softens. The breath deepens. The mind expands. And what once seemed pressing now appears manageable. From stillness, perspective arises. From perspective, wisdom follows. And from wisdom, action becomes effortless, unforced, right? To choose stillness is to trust. To trust that everything does not need to be fixed in this moment. That not every problem needs an immediate solution. That sometimes the wisest response is no response, just space. Space to observe, space to feel, space to let truth emerge on its own rather than trying to force it into shape. This is the strength of stillness. The power to remain steady when everything else moves, the clarity to wait when others rush, the courage to do nothing when the world demands everything. There is a quiet order that exists in the natural world. The wind moves through the trees, the moon pulls the tides. The bird does not rush its song. Everything flows not because it is forced, but because it is aligned. In the same way, there is a deeper order waiting to be realized within the human being. But it is often hidden, buried beneath noise, urgency, desire, and distraction. To live wisely is to come into harmony, not just with the external world, but with the one that exists inside. One world mirrors the other. The inner affects the outer. The outer reveals the inner. Most people seek control. They seek to organize their external world, to perfect their environment, to adjust circumstances so that peace becomes possible. But this is like trying to calm the reflection in the water without touching the surface of the lake. The reflection only settles when the water itself is still, and the water only becomes still when the wind, the inner wind, softens. To live in harmony between the inner and outer is not about achieving a fixed state. It is about alignment, like tuning an instrument. When one string is out of tune, the entire song sounds different. So it is with the self. If the inner world is restless, cluttered, anxious, the outer world becomes an echo of that same dissonance. Relationships become strained. Work feels heavy. Time becomes rushed. The world begins to reflect the inner condition like a mirror that cannot be covered. There is a rhythm to existence that becomes clear only when one slows down. And it is in that slowing down that the dialogue between inner and outer begins. The breath becomes the bridge. The body becomes the vessel. The mind becomes the listener. And when one begins to listen, not to the noise, but to the spaces between, something soft emerges: awareness. Awareness is not thinking. It is not analyzing. It is observing without the need to intervene. It is the state in which the inner world begins to settle, to take shape, to be seen clearly without judgment. Only from this space can harmony begin, because harmony is not the absence of noise, it is the intelligent arrangement of it. When a person lives in harmony with themselves, their presence becomes calm even in chaos. They do not need to force situations. They do not try to control others. Their decisions are not born from urgency, but from clarity. They move with the world, not against it. They are not easily provoked because they have trained themselves to watch the wave rise without being thrown by it. This inner discipline reflects outward. It touches their speech, their behavior, their relationships. The outer world is constantly shifting. It is not reliable as a permanent source of peace. One day it offers comfort, the next it offers challenge. If one's peace depends only on external conditions being favorable, then that peace is fragile. But when peace comes from within, when it is cultivated, tended like a fire that needs no fuel from outside, then even when the world is unsteady, the self remains grounded. To bring the inner and outer into harmony requires honesty, the willingness to see things as they are, not as we wish them to be. Internally, this means acknowledging discomfort, facing patterns that repeat, listening to emotional signals instead of avoiding them. Externally, it means living with integrity, allowing your inner clarity to shape your actions, your words, your commitments. When there is alignment between what you feel, what you think, and how you act, the inner and outer begin to speak the same language. There are many who decorate their outer world in pursuit of something they are missing inside. They build beautiful homes while their minds are chaotic. They dress in elegance while their emotions remain unhealed. They pursue status, wealth, and attention as if those things could replace the quiet need for connection, not with others, but with themselves. This is not harmony. This is layering. And no matter how many layers are added, the inner imbalance continues to leak through. To bring harmony between the inner and outer is to live with simplicity, not in terms of possessions, but in terms of attention. Simplicity in how we think, how we react, how we hold space for life. Complexity is often a sign of avoidance. We pile tasks, conversations, opinions, and distractions on top of the present moment to avoid sitting with what it actually holds. But the person who has learned to sit in stillness, not as punishment, but as practice, discovers that underneath the noise, a deep intelligence waits. This intelligence is not given by anyone. It is uncovered by removing what is false. The inner world is shaped by discipline, not the discipline of control, but of clarity. The outer world is shaped by consistency, not of habit, but of presence. When these two aspects meet, when the internal is calm and the external is aligned, something quiet, powerful, and enduring takes form. One does not need to chase opportunities because they begin to arrive. One does not need to argue to be heard because their presence communicates without words. The world becomes a place of reflection rather than reaction. You begin to notice how each interaction touches you, what it reveals about you, what it stirs within you. And instead of being thrown off balance by external events, you use them as cues to return inward. Every difficulty becomes a message. Every success becomes a mirror. Life stops being random. It becomes readable. And as you continue walking this path, not forward in haste, but inward with depth, the line between the inner and outer begins to dissolve. The breath you take becomes part of the wind. The silence you carry becomes part of the space you enter. You do not live in the world as a separate being trying to survive. You live through it, with it, as part of it, no longer separate from what is, but moving in rhythm with it. In freedom is a word spoken often but understood rarely. It is worn like a symbol, shouted as a demand, and pursued as if it were a destination waiting on the other side of restriction. Yet true freedom is not found in rebellion, nor in detachment, nor in the absence of boundaries. Freedom is not escape. It is responsibility, a quiet, enduring responsibility that begins and ends within the self. Many seek freedom as a means to run from rules, from expectations, from structures they did not choose. The desire to be free often arises in response to something that feels confining. A job that feels suffocating. A relationship that limits expression. A role that weighs too heavily. And so the instinct is to flee, to walk away, to break apart, to sever ties and declare independence. But escape is not the same as liberation. One can leave a place physically and still be bound to it mentally. One can abandon a structure and carry its chains in thought. To escape is to move. To be free is to understand. True freedom cannot be given. It must be earned, not from the world, but from the self. And it is earned through responsibility. Responsibility not in the form of duty to others, though that may follow, but responsibility for the state of one's own mind, one's choices, one's reactions, one's path. A person who seeks escape wants to be free from something. A person who embraces responsibility understands they are free to become something. There is a difference. The first points outward. The second turns inward. And only the inward direction leads to lasting freedom. To be free is to own your inner space. To claim the full consequence of your thinking. To stop blaming, shifting, excusing. It is the willingness to face discomfort, to meet failure, to confront fear, without handing that responsibility to others. When there is no one else to hold accountable for your peace, your discipline, your direction, then freedom has begun to awaken. Escape is seductive because it offers immediate relief. It promises a clean break, a new beginning, an open field with no fences. But every field, even the most open one, still requires direction. What will you do with your freedom once you have it? Where will you go without a map drawn by others? Can you stay true to your own path, without praise, without permission, without guidance? Many imagine freedom as a life without rules. But even nature, the free system we know, operates by rhythm, by balance, by law. The sun rises. The tides follow. The seed becomes a tree, not by force, but by inner design. In the same way, human freedom must be guided not from the outside, but by inner discipline. Discipline is not restriction. It is structure born from clarity. A person who lives without discipline is not free. They are a slave to impulse. They follow whatever thought arises. They chase every desire. They speak before reflecting. They act before seeing. This is not freedom. It is reaction. And a reactive life is not a sovereign one. Responsibility begins with observation. Observation of the mind, of how thoughts form, of how emotions swell, of how habits shape behavior. Without this awareness, we live on autopilot, mistaking our programming for our personality. Freedom is the moment we recognize the difference. Responsibility is the willingness to change what no longer serves us. To take responsibility is to say, this emotion is mine. This thought belongs to me. This action came from me, not from the world, not from circumstance, not from another person's failure. The free individual carries this weight, not as a burden, but as a sign of maturity. They do not deflect, they do not avoid, they reflect, and they respond with intention. Freedom without responsibility becomes chaos. It dissolves into inconsistency, into a life where nothing is held, nothing is followed through, nothing is grown. But responsibility without freedom becomes rigidity, a prison of obligation, a mechanical path that lacks the spark of the soul. True living requires both the fire of freedom and the form of responsibility. When one finds this balance, their decisions begin to change. They no longer seek what feels good in the moment. They seek what aligns with their values. They stop asking what is easy. They ask what is true. They no longer look to others for answers. They listen inwardly. And when they act, they do so with full ownership, knowing that what they choose today shapes who they become tomorrow. This is not an easy path. It is far easier to blame, to point outward, to declare that life or society or people are the reason we are limited. But blame is a form of bondage. It keeps the power outside. Responsibility returns it to the self. It says, I cannot control everything, but I can shape how I meet it. I can choose my posture. I can choose my path. Or freedom does not mean the absence of challenge. It means the presence of inner strength. It means saying yes when it aligns and no when it does not, without guilt, without fear. It means walking alone when needed, standing firm when questioned, listening to one's own rhythm, even when the world beats to a different drum. This kind of freedom is not loud. It does not scream for validation. It does not need to declare its independence with banners and noise. It moves quietly but with certainty. It is the kind of freedom that cannot be taken because it was never borrowed, it was built, layer by layer, choice by choice, thought by thought. It is born not in reaction, but in reflection, not in escape, but in endurance, not in avoidance, but in accountability. And through that accountability, one does not become smaller, but more whole, more rooted, more free, not because the world changed, but because the self no longer hides from its own power,